Welcome to Face Towards Zion. The Come Follow Me curricula for the week of April 27th through the May 3rd now introduces the travels of Zeniff with the settling of Limhi. We will learn of the reigns of Zeniff, Noah, and Limhi. For this week's cover photo, I selected another painting by Minerva Teckert. This is a picture of Ammon coming before King Limhi. I struggled to find the right painting, and if you're unsure, you can always use one of her paintings, as she has so many good to choose from. I previously used her painting of building Nephi's boat. I mentioned that she painted the world room of the Manti temple. Other temples often envisioned a barren wasteland. Minerva's vision was different. She created a grand procession of people from every culture, marching with heads high, hardly noticing the poor at their feet, beggars going unheeded, man's inhumanity to man. To Minerva, this was the lone and dreary world. For chapter titles for this week's lesson, I gave the means and ends titles of Chapter 7, Contact Reestablished with Limhi-Nephi, and Covenant Renewal. Chapter 8, we learn about another people, and Prophets, Seers, and Seer Stones. Chapter 9, Zeniff settles Nephi-Lehi, and the grass isn't always greener. And for Chapter 10, Zeniff's people keep their freedom, and good preparations lead to victory. Let's quickly review last week's lesson. King Benjamin concluded his speech and transferred the kingship to his son Mosiah, who is often called Mosiah II, since his grandfather was Mosiah I. Remember, King Benjamin is in the land of Zarahemla. For this week and then the next 2 weeks, we will leave the land of Zarahemla and tell of some other stories about another people. This will then all come back together in Mosiah chapter 25. We have stories of different groups of people, but the events are happening at the same time, and it can get confusing. Remember in the book of Omni, soon after the first Mosiah led the people to Zarahemla, that a group of people wanted to go back. In the book of Omni, the prophet Amaleki said, "And now I would speak somewhat concerning a certain number who went up into the wilderness to return to the land of Nephi, for there was a large number who were desirous to possess the land of their inheritance. Wherefore they went up into the wilderness, and their leader being a strong and mighty man and a stiff-necked man, wherefore he caused a contention among them, and they were all slain save 50 in the wilderness, and they returned again to the land of Zarahemla. And it came to pass that they also took others to a considerable number, and took their journey again into the wilderness. And I, Amaleki, had a brother who also went with them, and I have not since known concerning them. And I am about to lie down in my grave, and these plates are full, and I make an end of my speaking." It's now been more than 50 years, and there were some like Amaleki who had relatives that had gone on that journey. Many wanted to know what had happened to them. It must have been the talk of the town, as Mosiah seemed to get pestered with it quite often. So at the beginning of this week's lesson, chapter 7, it says, "And now it came to pass that after King Mosiah had had continual peace for the space of 3 years, he was desirous to know concerning the people who went up to dwell in the land of Limhi-Nephi, or in the city of Limhi-Nephi. For his people had heard nothing from them from the time they had left the land of Zarahemla. Therefore they wearied him with their teasings. And it came to pass that King Mosiah granted that 16 of their strong men might go up to the land of Limhi-Nephi to inquire concerning their brethren. And it came to pass that on the morrow they started to go up, having with them one Ammon, he being a strong and mighty man, and a descendant of Zarahemla, and he also was their leader." With the 2 different civilizations going on simultaneously, it's easy to lose track of who is who. I'm a very visual person, so I like to map out a timeline of what is going on. Remember, in the land of Zarahemla, we have the reigns of Mosiah, Benjamin, and then Mosiah. I have placed approximate dates and references with these kings. Notice that for Mosiah II, that he is discussed in chapter 6, and then the story of the people who returned to the land of Nephi is inserted into the narrative. We will pick up that story that is in chapter 6 when we come to Mosiah chapter 25. In the land of Nephi we will have Zeniff, Noah, and Limhi. Also, in a number of chapters are stories of Alma who separates from the society. Let me mention the name of Zeniff. I've always pronounced it as Zeniff, but if you look at the Book of Mormon pronunciation chart, the E is long, so it should be pronounced Zeniff. Please have patience with me if I pronounce this as Zeniff. Just remember, Mosiah-Benjamin-Mosiah and Zeniff Noah, and Limhi. In the stories we are reading, there are a number of journeys. Comparing these journeys can be interesting. Remember that I'm big on the chiastic structure of the Book of Mormon. We see that not only are chapters set in a chiastic structure, but often stories encompassing multiple chapters are tied with other stories which can be many chapters apart. When Mosiah decides to send a scouting party to search for the people in the land of Nephi, he selects a man named Ammon. The parallels of Ammon and King Mosiah the First are interesting. Mosiah the First is a descendant of Nephi. He travels from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla, where he will rise to become the king. On the trip from Nephi to Zarahemla, he stops at the land of Shilom, which is used as a resort. See Mosiah chapter 11, verse 13. Ammon, on the other hand, is a descendant of Zarahemla. Why would that be mentioned in the record? We often let generations pass and just think, oh, he was a descendant of Zarahemla. Well, remember how many generations are between King Zarahemla and Ammon. It is only 2. Ammon was King Zarahemla's grandson. If a king has a son, then the son is a prince. All the king's children are princes and princesses. The sons of the princes also carry the title of prince. However, if you are not on the line that will ascend to the throne, titles can be changed. For example, let's look at England today. The Queen is Elizabeth, who had 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. All are princes or princesses. Charles and Lady Di had 2 sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. Look at Prince Edward, the youngest son. He had 2 children, Lady Louise Windsor and James. Technically, Louise and James are a princess and a prince, but their titles were changed to a lady and a viscount. So if you are not on the line that will rise to the king, it's easy to lose your title of a prince. Now, we know that Ammon was a descendant of Zarahemla, so technically he was a prince. But it seems that he wasn't on the line to rise to the kingship, so he had to make another name for himself. It's kind of like he has something to prove. So, although he was of the royal line, he would not ascend to become the king. Ammon is a direct mirror of Mosiah. Mosiah went from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla. Ammon goes from Zarahemla to Nephi. Mosiah rose to the kingship. Ammon gave up the kingship. They both had something significant happen in the land of Shilom. Ammon seems to be a chiastic pattern of Mosiah. But then it even gets more interesting. In a few more chapters, we will be introduced to another Ammon, who is one of the sons of Mosiah. This Ammon is often distinguished as Ammon the Second. Ammon the Second will follow the pattern of Ammon the First. He will travel from Zarahemla to Nephi. He will arrive at the borders of the land. Ammon the Second has 3 brothers who go with him, Aaron, Omner, and Himni. It is interesting that in Mosiah 7, they list the 3 companions of Ammon the First, Amaleki, Helam, and Hem. Ammon the First was surrounded by the king's guard, taken and cast into prison, brought before the king, who was glad. Compared to the story that we will hear in a few weeks of Ammon the Second, he goes with his 3 brothers. Ammon is taken and bound into prison, carried before the king, who was much pleased to see him. The pattern with the details mentioned are fascinating. There are different chiasms within these stories. These chiasms are interesting, but what is their meaning? If you look at Mosiah the First, he started his journey to obey the Lord. He was then blessed because of his obedience. Look at the first Ammon. He went to find a people who were overzealous and had been brought into captivity. Finally, the second Ammon goes with the blessings of the Lord. Because of his obedience, he was blessed. I think the lesson here is we need to follow the Lord's will. We often have our own agendas, but if we follow our agenda, we will struggle. If we follow the Lord's agenda, then we will be blessed. We need to be aware of what the Lord wants us to do and then be obedient to that. I think that this is the lesson to be learned. Since this week's lesson covers chapters 7 through 10, let's begin with chapter 7. I already read the first 3 verses, so let's begin on verse 4. And now they knew not the course they should travel in the wilderness, to go up to the land of Lehi Nephi. Therefore they wandered many days in the wilderness, even 40 days did they wander. I often talk about the importance of key words, and there are 2 key words in this verse, the wilderness and 40 days. I would encourage you to create tags and tag these 2 words. After you complete the standard works and look back at the tags you've created, you will see very consistent patterns. The word wilderness is used in different ways. Here it is symbolic of traveling and not being sure where you are at. It takes faith to keep going. The word wilderness is found from the book of Revelation to Lehi, from Adam and Eve to Moses, and it is used in many different applications. The word is both symbolic and literal. Also, whenever you see a number that is nice and whole like the number 40, you have to think symbolic. They may have wandered for exactly 40 days before they came to the hill north of Shilom, which is also used in other places in the story. Look at the footnote on the word 40 in verse 4. Footnote A refers you to Numbers 13 and 25, which says, "And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days." This is the story of Moses sending 12 spies to search the land of Canaan. They searched for 40 days. Any similarities here? 12 people searched for 40 days. And you remember the rest of that story? It was Caleb and Joshua who were the only ones that said to go up and inhabit the land. All the others were afraid. As it worked out, Caleb and Joshua were the only ones who made it to the promised land. Here in Moses they send out 16 strong men, but they wander 40 days. I am sure the reference is intentional. Let's quickly review the symbolism of 40. In Hebrew, the number 4 stands for geographic totality, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 directions of the compass, the 4 seasons. Anciently, they thought there were 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Multiplying a number by 10 brings it to completeness, or expands its wholeness. For Noah it rained 40 days and 40 nights. The children of Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. The spies searched for 40 days. Moses fasted for 40 days. Christ fasted for 40 days. The list goes on and on. Here they are saying their wandering was complete. They gave it all they had. After Mosiah takes his 3 brethren, Amalekah, Helam, and Hem, into the land of Nephi and the land of Shilom, they are surrounded by the king's guard, were bound and taken to prison. After 2 days they came before King Limhi. Let's take a moment and talk about King Limhi. Again, the lineage went Zeniff, Noah, and Limhi. In Mosiah 11 and 1, we learn that Zeniff conferred the kingdom upon Noah, one of his sons. However, Limhi ascended to the throne in a different way. In chapter 19, we will learn that as King Noah climbs a tower to get away from Gideon, he sees the Lamanites coming upon the land. He asks Gideon to spare him, and he basically runs away and tells all to leave their wives and children and save themselves. The Lamanite captured all who remained, for some men had stayed behind with their wives and children. Chapter 19, verse 16 says, "And now there was one of the sons of the king among those that were taken captive, whose name was Limhi." 10 verses later, in verse 26, Limhi, being the son of the king, having the kingdom conferred upon him by the people. So the people chose him to be the king. We know that Noah had many wives and concubines, but we don't know how many sons he had or why they chose Limhi. But verse 17 does say that he was a just man. We will follow the story of Limhi for chapters 7 and 8 before a flashback will bring us to chapter 21. With 21-28, the discussion picks up right up where it left off. In these 2 chapters, we learn quite a bit about Limhi. Yes, he is a just man, but another interesting thing about Limhi is that he is also a scriptorian, and he loves to learn. In chapter 7 alone, Limhi will quote 7 verses of Scripture. Before we get into his reading of the Scripture, there is one verse that really stands out. It is verse 18. Once Limhi learns who Ammon is, he is overjoyed and calls all his people to come to the temple, and so he can tell them what happened. Verse 18. "And it came to pass that when they had gathered themselves together, that he spake unto them in this wise, saying, O ye my people, lift up your heads and be comforted. For behold, the time is at hand, or is not far distant, when we shall no longer be in subjection to our enemies, notwithstanding our many strugglings, which have been in vain. Yet I trust there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made." I love the phrase, yet I trust there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made. Do you ever get to a place in your life where you know something's big is going to happen, but you don't know what it is? All you know is it's going to be big and it's going to be hard, but it needs to happen and you are excited and scared at the same time. I don't want to raise any alarms and I don't know what will happen, but it seems that we are getting closer to the Lord's second coming. The people have been more and more wicked. Religion is generally talked down to and often despised. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have felt a small earthquake. Our federal deficit is growing so fast that I don't know how we will ever pay it off, but no one seems worried. We know that the Lord will be coming soon, and there has been prophecies that the last days could be tough. Do you feel that? Quote, there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made, unquote. In instances such as this, what do? Verse 19, therefore, lift up your heads and rejoice, and put your trust in God, in that God who is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Look at what God did in other generations. It's not a matter if God can protect us and deliver us from what may happen. The key is we need to return to Him. We need to be on His side. Therefore, lift up your heads and rejoice, and put your trust in God. Before we move on, I would again like to mention to create another tag and look at the phrase, lift up your heads, how that phrase is used in the scriptures. Here I listed some verses I would include in this tag, and there are more. There will soon become a day when we need to lift up our heads. We will want to know what that means. As King Limhi continues his speech, he talks about his grandfather Zeniff, and then how his people were brought into bondage. This happened because they killed Abinadi, and then he says what Abinadi had said to them. Remember, I have said to put in quotes when people are talking. Also, I'm going to add some markers to this verse. Read along with me. Here Limhi is quoting what Abinadi had said. And because he said unto them, one, quote, that Christ was God, the Father of all things, unquote, and said that, two, quote, he should take upon him the image of man, and it should be the image after which man was created in the beginning, unquote. Or in other words, he said, three, quote, that man was created after the image of God, unquote. And four, quote, that God should come down among the children of men and take upon him flesh and blood and go forth upon the face of the earth, unquote. Here, Limhi is quoting Abinadi directly 4 times. Apparently, Abinadi's speech was on record, and Limhi had committed much of it to memory, as he now was able to quote it. If we look at each of these quotes, we find that the first one is from Mosiah 16 and 15. The second quote that Limhi mentioned is not in our existing scriptures. The third quote, that man was created after God's image, is not in Abinadi's speech, but it is part of Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. Limhi's fourth quote, that God should come down among the children of men, is the charge that was brought against Abinadi that resulted in his death. We will discuss this quite a bit more next week, but this is in Mosiah 17 and 8, and it is also mentioned in 15 and 1. To finish chapter 7, Limhi will quote 3 more verses, but none of these verses are in scriptures that we have today. The verses are 29, for behold, the Lord hath said, quote, I will not succor my people in the day of their transgression, but I will hedge up their ways that they prosper not, and their doing shall be as a stumbling block before them. Verse 30, and again he saith, quote, if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the shaft thereof in the whirlwind, and the effect thereof is poison, unquote. And verse 31, and again he saith, quote, if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the east wind, which bringeth immediate destruction, unquote. Where would Limhi have read these scriptures? It is apparent that when Zeniff led the people from Zarahemla, that they took a copy of the brass plates with them. They didn't take the brass plates as they were passed down to King Benjamin. Limhi would have had to have read these verses on his copy of the brass plates. The last quote is interesting. If my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the east wind, which bringeth immediate destruction. This has reference to Israel. East of Jerusalem is a big desert. When the east wind blows, it brings hot air, and with it famines and pestilences, often locusts, which mean destruction. The west wind, in comparison, is coming from the Mediterranean and is cooler and will bring forth life. Limhi wraps up his speech with verse 33. But if you will turn to the Lord with full purpose of heart, and put your trust in him, and serve him with all diligence of mind, if you do this, he will, according to his own will and pleasure, deliver you out of bondage. I see this verse as kind of Limhi's summary. This is the bottom line. And I think this is applicable today as the day it was delivered. We have an effectual struggle to be made. But if you will turn to the Lord with full purpose of heart, and put your trust in him, and serve him with all of diligence of mind, if you do this, he will, according to his own will and pleasure, deliver you out of bondage. After the speeches and everyone returned to their homes, I would think that Limhi would sit down with Ammon and say, okay, how are we going to escape from here? Let's put together a plan. But Limhi does something interesting, verses 4 and 5. And it came to pass that after he had done this, that King Limhi dismissed the multitude, and caused that they should return every one to his own house. And it came to pass that he caused that the plates which contained the record of his people from the time they had left the land of Zarahemla should be brought before Ammon, that he might read them. He wanted to share with Ammon the history of his people. Before they could even plan anything, Ammon needed to know what had already been tried. Once Ammon was finished, it says in verse 6, Now, as soon as Ammon had read the record, the king inquired of him to know if he could interpret languages, and Ammon told him that he could not. Limhi told him the story of how they sent 43 people to search for Zarahemla, but instead they found a civilization that had been destroyed. Among the bones and buildings they found 24 gold plates, and he asked if he knew anyone who could translate. Verse 13. Now Ammon said unto him, I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records, for he has wherewith he can look, and translate all records that are of an ancient date, and it is a gift from God. And the things are called interpreters, and no man can look in them except he be commanded, lest he should look for that he ought not, and he should perish. And whosoever is commanded to look in them, the same is called a seer. Now, much of what is in Mosiah chapter 8 is also in Mosiah chapter 21. The chapter 21 version says, And now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God, whereby he could interpret such engravings, yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. And it's from this point that chapter 21 continues the story from chapter 8 like there wasn't even a break, which includes chapters 9 through 21. But what about these interpreters? If we follow the story, King Mosiah interprets his writing in Mosiah chapter 28. It says, After having translated and caused to be written the records which were on the plates of gold, which had been found by the people of Limhi, which were delivered to him by the hand of Limhi. And now he translated them by the means of those 2 stones which were fastened into the 2 rims of a bow. This is the first time we've heard about the 2 stones fastened into the 2 rims of a bow. Of course, chronologically, the book of Ether is first, and they're in there, but we won't read about that for months to come. Where did Mosiah get these 2 stones fastened into a bow? The 2 most logical places would be either they were with the gold plates that King Limhi had, or they would have been part of the records that the people of Zarahemla gave to the first King Mosiah, who was the grandfather of the King Mosiah we are talking about. The way Ammon words it, you get the impression that Mosiah had these interpreters before King Limhi gave him the 24 gold plates. So the best candidate seems to be from the land of Zarahemla. Remember in the book of Omni, And it came to pass in the days of Mosiah that there was a large stone brought unto him with engravings on it, and he did interpret the engravings by the gift and power of God. And they gave an account of one Coriantumr, and the slain of his people. And Coriantumr was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, and he dwelt with them for the space of 9 moons. Here all it says is Mosiah interpreted the engravings by the gift and power of God. There is no reference to these stones. Also, I find it interesting that when King Benjamin gave the important things to Mosiah, he doesn't mention the interpreters. This is in Mosiah chapter 1, verse 16. And moreover, he also gave him charge concerning the records which are engraven on the plates of brass, and also the plates of Nephi, and also the sword of Laban, and the ball or director, which led our fathers through the wilderness, which was prepared by the hand of the Lord, that thereby they might be led, every one according to the heed and diligence which they gave him. Even though King Benjamin didn't mention them when he gave them to Mosiah, Mosiah did mention them when he gave them to Alma the younger in Mosiah 28 and 20. And now as I said unto you, that after King Mosiah had done these things, he took the plates of brass and all the things which he had kept, and confirmed them upon Alma, who was the son of Alma, yea, all the records and also the interpreters, and conferred them upon him, and commanded him that he should keep them and preserve them, and also keep a record of his people, handing them down from one generation to another, even as they had been handed down from the time that Limhi left Jerusalem. Interestingly, Alma will mention these when he gives these to his son Helaman in Alma chapter 37, verse 21. There we read, "And now I will speak unto you concerning those 24 plates, that ye keep them, that the mysteries and the works of darkness and their secret works, or their secret works of those people who had been destroyed, may be made manifest unto this people, yea, all their murders and robbings and their plunderings, and all their wickedness and abominations, may be made manifest unto this people, yea, and that ye preserve these interpreters." Interestingly, other than the book of Ether, where we learn of their origins, we won't hear about these 2 stones in a bow until Joseph Smith takes them out of the hill. Joseph Knight later said that Joseph was more excited about the Urim and Thummim than he was about the plates themselves. Joseph Knight said, "He seemed to think more of the glasses or the Urim and Thummim than he did of the plates, for, says he, I can see anything. They are marvelous." Then, right in the middle of reading about the story, all of a sudden there is this flashback, and we will learn about the history of the events that led up to the story they were talking about. This flashback will begin with Mosiah chapter 9 and will continue until it seamlessly merges into the same story in chapter 21, verse 28. The story in chapters 9 and 10 are a first-person account by Zeniff. By reading this first-person account, we can learn more of Zeniff than if Mormon were abridging it. We don't have time to cover chapters 9 and 10, but I would like to give an overview of Zeniff and who he was. We first hear of Zeniff when he is with a group of people that are going back to see if they can inherit the land of their forefathers, the land of Nephi, or they will call it Lehi-Nephi, which is now inhabited by the Lamanites. Historically, the relationship between the Nephites and the Lamanites were very antagonistic. Enos had said, quote, "And I bear record that the people of Nephi did seek diligently to restore the Lamanites unto the true faith in God. But our labors were vain, their hatred was fixed, and they were led by their evil nature, that they became wild and ferocious, and a bloodthirsty people, full of idolatry and filthiness, feeding upon beasts of prey, dwelling in tents, and wandering about in the wilderness with a short skin girdle about their loins, and their heads shaving, and their skill was in the bow and in the scimitar and the axe. And many of them did eat nothing, save it was raw meat, and they were continually seeking to destroy us." The next book, Jerem, says this of the Lamanites, "And they were scattered upon much of the face of the land, and the Lamanites also, and they were exceedingly more numerous than were they of the Lamanites, and they loved murder and would drink the blood of beasts." Into this environment comes Zeniff, but it says, "I, Zeniff, having been taught in all the languages of the Nephites, and having had a knowledge of the land of Nephi, or of the land of our father's first inheritance, and having been sent as a spy among the Lamanites, that I might spy out their forces, that our army might come upon them and destroy them. But when I saw that which was good among them, I was desirous that they should not be destroyed." Instead of looking for war, Zeniff was a man of peace and saw the good in others. And initially everything works out. They go into the king, and he agrees to let them come back into their lands and rebuild buildings and the walls of the cities, and they begin to plant and prosper. In this episode, it kind of makes you feel for the king's people that got kicked out. It doesn't say much about them, but they had inherited some nice homes and were doing well. Then their king kicks them out, and they have to start all over somewhere else. And they lived happily forever, or at least for 12 years. Therefore it came to pass that after we had dwelt in the land for the space of 12 years, that King Laman began to grow uneasy, lest by any means my people should wax strong in the land, and that they could not overpower them and bring them into bondage. Now they were a lazy and an idolatrous people. Therefore they were desirous to bring us into bondage, that they might glut themselves with the labors of our hands, yea, that they might feast themselves upon the flocks of our fields. Therefore it came to pass that King Laman began to stir up his people, that they should contend with my people. Therefore there began to be wars and contentions in the land. Previously he, quote, saw that which was good among them. I was desirous that they should not be destroyed, unquote. Now, quote, they were a lazy and an idolatrous people, unquote. There begins to be a series of wars, and in chapter 10, Zeniff says, they were a wild and ferocious and a bloodthirsty people, believing in the traditions of their fathers. We see a little bit different perspective, don't you think? There are numerous lessons here if we want to visit them. In our youth, we see the best in the world. We want everyone to live in peace and prosperity. We want there to be no rich and no poor. We want health care for all, free college, and the list goes on. But somewhere reality sets in and you realize we can't afford these things. My thoughts are, if you give someone something, there is often no accountability. If you work for something, then it becomes important to you. You know that I like to close with a quote from a general authority. We have been talking about the struggles of different peoples, and that we have an effectual struggle to be made. We have work to do, but what should we do? Last year's General Conference was held right before Easter. Elder D. Todd Christofferson said this:
While we strive to be diligent in building up Zion, including our part in the gathering of the Lord's elect and the redemption of the dead, we should pause to remember that it is the Lord's work, and He is doing it. He is the Lord of the vineyard, and we are His servants. He bids us labor in the vineyard with our might this last time, and He labors with us. It would probably be more accurate to say He permits us to labor with Him. As Paul said, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. It is He who is hastening His work in its time. Employing our admittedly imperfect efforts, our small means, the Lord brings about great things. This great and last dispensation is building steadily to its climax. Zion on earth being joined with Zion from above at the Savior's glorious return. The Church of Jesus Christ is commissioned to prepare and is preparing the world for that day. And so this Easter, let us truly celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ and all that it portends. His return to reign for 1,000 years of peace, a righteous judgment and perfect justice for all, the immortality of all who ever lived upon this earth, and the promise of eternal life. Christ's resurrection is the ultimate assurance that all will be put right. Let us be about building up Zion to hasten that day.